y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. Today we are discussing, and I say discussing in a very general sense, we are talking about Night Shift by Stephen King. This is episode 5 of the King Chronicles. So, up here I do have two different editions. I do have a mass market paperback. It is upstairs. I am not going to get it. It is the edition that I use to actually physically read and tab and all of those good things. But I do have this, which is a book club edition, and then, you know, that other edition there. So that's a thing. So Night Shift was published in February of 1978. It is the first short story collection that we are seeing from Stephen King. Even if you have not read some of these short stories before, these are probably several names that you will recognize because many of these have been adapted into short films and feature-length film. So even if you haven't read this collection, you know, you'll probably have a general idea of what some of these stories are about. I won't be going into an analysis of most of the stories just because there's too many of them. I will be just talking about if there are any connections within the Stephen King universe with these stories, as well as any subsequent adaptations that have come out of those stories as well. So for the collection as a whole, just, you know, a couple of fun facts. Collects 20 short stories, with most of them being previously published in various magazines. There are a few that are collected in this that were published for the first time in this book. This is actually the first book that he wrote a foreword for, and if you have read most of his other works, and even a lot of the editions that I have read up until this episode, there are forewords that are attached to them that were added on later on, but this is the first that he actually did publish a foreword for. Other than that, there's really not much else to say about the collection as a whole. So let's just jump right in and talk about these stories. So the very first story in the collection is Jerusalem's Lot, which I did briefly mention Jerusalem's Lot whenever I did the episode for Salem's Lot, which I will link up above. This story was previously unpublished before it was collected in this work. Let me make sure that I don't drop this coffee because it's really hot. And this story is actually like a precursor to Salem's Lot, and you know, kind of some background on the Marston house and some things that happened there before the events of Salem's Lot. So it was very interesting in that way, and does have that previous connection to another book in the King universe. I personally enjoyed it. It was told through letters, and I liked it. I liked that it set up what was to come in Salem's Lot. So, you know, I have nothing but good things to say about that one. So the next story in the collection is Graveyard Shift, and this is a story of a man who works in a factory, and he kind of hates his job, but they take a weekend and decide to clean out some of the like sub-basement levels, right? Well, while they're cleaning out this sub-basement, they start encountering these rats, and they are abnormally large, and as they go deeper into the basement, things begin to evolve. There are a couple of like really gross moments, but atmospherically I did really enjoy it. He just does a really good job in the story of like giving you the heebie-jeebies, you know. It's really yucky, and you're in this dank, dark basement, and it's gross. And it actually was adapted into a film of the same name in 1990. So next short story was Night Surf, and here is another short story where we see a connection to another work that was published directly after this one. So Night Surf is about a group of teenagers, or a couple of teenagers I should say, who are dealing with the aftermath of the super flu, which, if you are familiar with King's works at all, you know that the super flu was the basis of the book The Stand. Now, Night Surf was originally published in 1969, while The Stand as a whole wasn't published until 1978. So, you know, this really is like the beginning idea for The Stand, right? It was really interesting to see how the idea originated, and there are definitely some differences in between the superflu that is shown in Night Surf versus the superflu that's shown in The Stand. so that piece of that was really interesting to see, like, how that concept and the idea kind of evolved. I will say that, once again, this is a book that was, or a story, I should say, that was written in the 60s. So I really hated the treatment of the female character, but I guess, you could really kind of call that like sign of the times, so to speak. It's one of those things where it's like, I get it, but I don't like it. Again, it doesn't detract anything from the story, because once again, like, I get it, but I don't have to like it. So there's that. Next story in this collection is The Mangler, and this was originally published in 1972. And this one I really liked. King has a habit of writing about like machines coming to life on their own. There's Christine, and then this one, The Mangler. So it's a very interesting piece about a laundry machine that has a taste for blood, right? I personally really enjoyed like the storytelling and the whole concept of something so mundane as a laundry machine like actually coming to life and having a taste for blood. I thought that it was an interesting concept, and then the way that it ended, I really enjoyed that for whatever reason. King sometimes is really bad at endings, but I really liked the way that this particular story ended. The Mangler does have a film adaptation. It was adapted in 1995. Never saw it. I don't know if it was trash. If I had to guess, it probably was trash. But so here's an interesting connection that we have in this one. So Carrie was originally published in 1974. This was published in 1972. The Mangler was in a magazine, and the Mangler originally lived at the Blue Ribbon Laundry, which is where Margaret White actually worked. So there's a little very, very small connection, but just a little something to point out. Next short story is I Am the Doorway. This one was published in 1971 originally, and this is a weird little story. And if you've ever seen the cover of one of the mass markets with the hand with the eyeballs, I'll put a graphic over here, over there, over somewhere. I will put a graphic for you for reference, but this is actually the short story where that graphic comes from. And it's about a guy who was an astronaut who brought an alien life form back with him. And it's interesting. I didn't love it. This particular short story wasn't super memorable for me. From the time that I read it to the time that I went to go make the notes for this episode, I actually had to go back and double check what it was about, because I couldn't remember. So it wasn't bad, it just wasn't very memorable for me personally. And it was actually adapted into several different short films. No feature-length films that most people would have heard of, but it was adapted in 2009, 2015, and in 2017 as well. Next story is The Boogeyman. I really like the story. This is one of my favorites from the collection, I think, and it was originally published in 1973. A man is, he's kind of suffering after the unconnected deaths of two of his children. And so he decides to actually go see a psychiatrist. And the thing that the children had in common before their untimely deaths, they were crying about a boogeyman before they died. The way that the story is set up, it's, this father who is in a psychiatrist's office, and he's telling the story of how his children died and what the circumstances were surrounding it. And so through the telling of the story, we're led to believe that something entirely different has happened. And then the ending, I loved it. I obviously am not going to talk about the ending because I don't want to spoil it, but I really, really loved the ending. I don't know if I'm in the minority or the majority on how people mostly feel about this, but I really loved this one. This is one that I've thought about several times since I read it. I don't know why, but I really liked this story. And this particular short story was actually adapted into a play and a short film. There was a full movie in 1982, apparently, and there is actually been a adaptation that was announced this year. But I don't have any details. I just know that an adaptation was announced. Next story in the collection is Gray Matter. This one was published in 1973. Weird story about drinking beer. I personally don't like beer, so not that I don't like it, I just don't drink it very often. If I'm gonna drink anything, it's probably gonna be Moscato because I like my alcoholic grape juice, but that's neither here nor there. Possible commentary about the danger of alcohol just because of the way that, things kind of go down, but I feel like that's probably a reach more than anything. But it was a weird story, no adaptations that I'm aware of. I didn't love it, but I also didn't hate it, so. Battleground is the next one, and it was originally published in 1972. Maybe my least favorite story in the whole collection. I just didn't really care for it. It's about some toys that come to life and attack a hitman. I didn't really care for the overall concept, so I don't really have much to say about it. It was adapted for television. They did, I think it was like TNT or something, did a Nightmares and Dreamscapes where they adapted a bunch of short stories as like, you know, as a like TV anthology series. It wasn't, but they didn't have like full episodes. They would do like 2 or something during an episode. I can't remember exactly what it is. Anyway, it was adapted and I remember seeing it and being like, the fuck am I watching? So I didn't enjoy the adaptation and I didn't enjoy the actual story. So definitely one of the weaker ones in my personal opinion. Next one is Trucks, which was originally published in 1973. Very similar in the things are coming to life that shouldn't come to life, right? Sentient machines are always terrifying, right? So this is where trucks come to life. Cars and trucks come to life and these people get stranded at a gas station. You know, they're like sentient and they're trying to like mow down humans and eventually like humans are gonna become slaves, and it's an interesting concept. I didn't hate the story, but I didn't love it either. This is actually the short story that was adapted into the film Maximum Overdrive, which King himself actually directed in 1986. And it was again adapted into a television movie in 1997. And I don't recall having ever seen either of them, but from what I hear, they're not good. Next story is Sometimes They Come Back. First published in 1974. Our main character, Jim, his brother was murdered, but Jim was able to get away, and years later, the people that actually murdered his brother have come back to haunt him in a very real way. That's pretty much the synopsis of the story. This is one of the longer ones, if I remember correctly. This one I did enjoy. It was adapted in 1991 into a television movie, and it actually spawned like 2 or 3 straight-to-video sequels, apparently. And I never saw any of those. Next short story is Strawberry Spring, and this one is actually one of my favorites, I think. It was originally published in 1978. The narrator of the story is remembering his time at New Sharon College after he had read a headline about some murders that have taken place there. And it's a Strawberry Spring, which is, I believe, in early spring in the New England area. And the last time that those murders took place, ironically, were also Strawberry Spring. I don't want to say too much else about this one because spoilers, but I did really, really like this one. I don't know why. It's actually one that I remembered very well from the first time I read it years ago and then going through and rereading it this time. There are no adaptations that I am aware of for this particular one, but I did really like it. Next story is The Ledge. This one was published in 76. So our main character, Norris, has an affair with like a crime mob boss's wife, and they're like planning on running away together, but he finds himself face to face with the husband, or the crime boss, and finds himself literally being shoved out onto a ledge. This one is not so much horror as it is like thriller suspense. I didn't really love it. I found it to be sort of forgettable in my personal opinion. This one was actually a segment in the horror anthology film Cat's Eye. So next one is The Lawnmower Man, originally published in 1975. So I want to start off by saying that Lawnmower Man, you guys are probably like, oh yeah, that's been adapted into a film, right? The answer to that is no. While there is a film called The Lawnmower Man, it is not at all the short story, just letting you know right now. This is about a guy, he's mowing his lawn and he accidentally like runs over the neighbor's cat, or his own cat, I can't remember which, and it is like a traumatic experience for his kid and his wife, and so he can't mow the lawn because every time he mows the lawn or like goes to turn on the lawnmower, like his family freaks out, and it's because it was just so traumatic. So he's like, well shit, somebody needs to come take care of the lawn. So he sees this ad somewhere, you know, about a lawn care service, and he calls them, and things kind of go from there. The guy who comes to his house to take care of his lawn has some unconventional methods. We'll leave it at that. But I really liked this story. Again, it has absolutely no bearing on the film adaptation of the same name, but I really liked the story. There was a short film produced for this one in, I think, 87, excuse me. It was like a 15-minute short film that was actually based on this story, but there's that. Okay. Quitters Inc. is the next one, and this is about a man named Richard who really wants to quit smoking, and he runs into an old friend or coworker or something. And this guy just looks great. And he's like, oh yeah, I quit smoking. I used the service. It was really great. Here's the card. You should call them. I haven't had a cigarette in X amount of time and I feel great and blah, blah, blah. So Richard's like, okay, well, my wife's always after me to quit smoking, so I'm going to give it a shot. And so he goes through and he does his consultation. Turns out the methods that they use are very effective, but they're not exactly methods that a lot of people would use. So again, this is another one that I very much enjoyed. This particular one has been adapted a couple of times. It was adapted as part of Cat's Eye. There was a Bollywood film that was made with the same premise. And there was a segment in Tales from the Dark Side that had a very similar premise. It wasn't the exact same thing, but it was very similar. Next is I Know What You Need. This was originally published in 1976. So a girl named Elizabeth starts dating this guy that she never really expected to start dating. And things just seem too perfect, but she's kind of always put it out of the back of her mind. Well, her roommate just knows that something's weird, and so she starts to do some investigating, and things kind of snowball. I liked this one and the idea that you never really know people, I guess. There are no adaptations for this particular one. I enjoyed the story itself, so. Next one is a name that probably most of you will recognize, and that is Children of the Corn. So this short story is where the entire franchise was spawned. I enjoy the short story. It was originally published in 77. So if you are unfamiliar with the plot of the story, it is a couple who are very much nearing the end of their marriage, and they are traveling in an effort to save their marriage. And they go through, they're kind of lost, and they're going through the middle of nowhere when this child runs out in the middle of the road and they hit him. And so they go to the nearest town. Well, things are not quite right in this town, and we kind of find out what's happening as the story goes on. So stuff gets weird. So this is actually another story that has connections to other works in the Stephen King universe, all of which were published after the fact. We're starting to see certain elements be reused. So this story has connections to it, The Stand, as well as the short story 1922. Hemingford Home is mentioned in this one, and Gatlin is also mentioned. Which are places that appear in all of those works as well. So this was first adapted into a short film in 83 called Disciples of the Crow, and then a full-length film was also produced in 83, Children of the Corn, and it spawned a 9-film franchise running until 2018, this year. There's 9 films. No one asked for this, unfortunately. And there was also a TV movie that was produced in 2009 by Sci-Fi, and I'm pretty sure that I saw that one, and it was also not good, but yes. This is definitely one of the more well-known works of Stephen King, I feel like, because of that franchise. If you're not a reader of horror, but you still enjoy horror as a genre, especially a film genre, then you're definitely familiar with this particular short story. Because if I remember correctly, there is, in the original film, I cannot speak for the subsequent sequels. In the original film, most of the plot points are very close to the short story, and then obviously expanded upon because, it's a feature film. So next is The Last Rung on the Ladder, and this one is not so much horror. This one is very different than most of the other stories in this particular collection. This is a story that was published for the first time in Night Shift. So it's about a man named Larry who is kind of coming to terms with the guilt that he feels over the suicide of his younger sister. And in coming to terms with that, he's kind of telling stories from their childhood. I liked this story, but it was very sad. It was very depressing. And again, very, very different than pretty much every other story in this adaptation. Very much a character study in a sense, versus pretty much anything else, but it is a story that makes you feel a lot of emotion in a short time, and that's one of the things that I really do love about short fiction. This is another one that is connected to The Stand in particular, because it does take place in Hemingford Home. There are no adaptations for this. I feel like you couldn't really make an adaptation of this just because of the general idea of the story itself. But next is The Man Who Loved Flowers. It was originally published in 1977. There is a young man who is clearly in love, and he's walking down the street. He's got his flowers, and people are stopping and noticing how happy he is, but things are not exactly what they seem to be. And this is another story that I really, really love. There are a lot of subtle giveaways about what is really happening as you read through the story, and I just really enjoyed the way that it was written and the way that everything unfolded. It is very short. I don't know, this is another one of those that whenever I read it years ago, this is one that I really remembered. So, and this is one that doesn't actually have an adaptation, but I guess there was a script that was written, but the adaptation was never actually produced. Next story is One for the Road, which is another Salem's Lot story. It was originally published again in 1977. There's a couple of old timers who are at like some convenience store, and they're just, you know, hanging out in the snow. And this man comes in and says, hey, my car's broken down and my wife and kid are in the car. Can someone please come help me? Well, it's full dark outside, and they are very close to Jerusalem's Lot. This particular story takes place after the events of Salem's Lot. And so they're like, oh, I don't know about that. But they end up going to help anyway, because they're just good people like that, and things kind of go from there. I liked this quick little glance at what some of the after effects were of the events that transpired in Salem's Lot. So I enjoyed the story. I thought it was fun. And there are no adaptations of this one to speak of. And the very last story in this is The Woman in the Room, another one that was previously unpublished until the publication of this book. And this is a story about a man who is struggling with the decision to basically euthanize his terminally ill mother. And this is another one that is not so much horror. It's horror in a very real sense, I guess you could say, just simply because of the subject matter, but it's not, you know, that supernatural horror and stuff that we've, you know, really come to know from Stephen King. And it is, again, one of those deeper stories, you know, like The Last Rung on the Ladder, which is very interesting to me that so many of these were written and published before, and then you have a handful that were unpublished before this particular work, and a couple of them that were unpublished are like very different. So that little bit is interesting. There's no adaptations of that one that I am aware of. So this particular King Chronicles was a little bit more interesting. You know, there wasn't really any in-depth analysis, just really talking about the story, what the plot is, what my thoughts were, you know, and a lot of it was, oh yeah, I liked it, you know, or I didn't like it. With it being short fiction, I don't want to go too deep into it because it's really easy to give away the entire plot of a short story because it's short, right? So that is all I have. Have you read this particular collection? What's your favorite story from this collection? If you have read it, comment down below and let me know. Did I miss any fun facts? Do you have any other information that I missed? If you did, also comment down below. You can also contact me on Goodreads, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those links can be found down below. As always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up or hit subscribe if you have not already. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.